You are opening the infinite lunchbox where we are making sense of this moment. I'm Stephanie Lepp, and today we're going to dive into what's being called the backlash to the techlash. In other words, as we all sit at home, social distancing and sheltering in place, we're suddenly feeling real grateful for Zoom and Google Hangouts and Skype and even Facebook and Twitter. And suddenly feeling not so resentful of our tech overlords. And thus, the backlash to the techlash. But wait a sec. Isn't Facebook still a threat to the 2020 election? And isn't Twitter now being used to spread misinformation about the coronavirus? Isn't social media still bad for democracy? Or is it good? Or is it bad and good? Precisely. In this episode of The Infinite Lunchbox, we're going to talk about how our relationship with different technologies changes over time. And in order to get there, we're going to introduce the Gartner hypecycle. Here we go. The Gartner hypecycle, developed by research firm Gartner Inc., is a model of how new technologies diffuse through society. The hypecycle is depicted on two axes. The x-axis is time and the y-axis is visibility. And so it plots visibility over time. And the cycle consists of 5 phases. Phase 1 is the technology trigger, which is when a new technology is introduced. Let's say social media. This new technology then rises to the second phase, the peak of inflated expectations, which is when we decide that social media is going to strengthen democracy and alleviate poverty and save the world. Inevitably, the technology fails to fulfill these inflated expectations, and so we descend into the third phase, the trough of disillusionment. See what social media is doing to us? It's destroying democracy and ripping apart our social fabric. We should just ban it altogether. But it is from this trough, this pile of rubble, that we ascend to the fourth phase, the slope of enlightenment, and realize that the technology at hand is amazing for some things and not so amazing for others. And it is so much more helpful to know what social media is useful for, not everything, than it is to fight about whether social media writ large is good or bad. And then finally, we arrive at the fifth and final phase, the Plateau of Productivity, where we can just use the technology in a way that is broadly deemed productive. Okay, so now that we're familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, let's put some actual technologies into the different phases. So these days, let's say 2020, some technologies that are on their wide-eyed journey from technology trigger to peak of inflated expectations include nanoscale 3D printing, flying autonomous vehicles, and citizen data science, which is interesting given what we talked about in the Infinite Lunchbox episode on post-normal science. Technologies that are feeling really good about themselves at the peak of inflated expectations, little do they know what's coming, are chatbots, smart contracts, and decentralized identity. On the flip side, technologies that are currently falling from grace and being consigned to the trough of disillusionment include AI assistants like Alexa and Echo, autonomous driving, and, of course, social media like Facebook and Twitter, and hence the techlash. Technologies that have already dusted themselves off and are humbly ascending the slope of enlightenment include public cloud storage, protected browsers, and disaster recovery as a service, which I didn't even know existed, DRAAS. And technologies that are just chilling on the plateau of productivity, which is why they're going to seem blah to you, email marketing, cloud office, and speech recognition. Note there are much more detailed explanations of the Gartner hype cycle out there, and not all technologies perfectly fit the model, and it's not a cycle. But I think the hype cycle is still a useful heuristic for understanding the way we relate to and adopt technologies over time. And thus, a couple takeaways. Takeaway number 1. Like we did with the Infinite Lunchbox episode on the spiral dynamics of consciousness, we might wonder, the fall from the peak to the trough is so painful. Can't we just go straight to the slope of enlightenment, or at least get through the hype cycle more quickly? But as with spiral dynamics, we can't really, nor would we necessarily want to bypass the trough or any of the phases, because the peak is where we experiment with a technology and try using it on way too many things. And the trough is where we learn what it's not useful for, which is what allows us to ascend the slope of enlightenment, where we see clearly what it is useful for. That said, being collectively aware of the hype cycle can help us both understand why we react the way we react to a given technology, and maybe not go through the hype cycle more quickly, but at least go through it with a little less pain. Because some technologies get so beat down in the trough of disillusionment, they don't even make it to the slope of enlightenment. And certainly some technologies don't deserve to make it to the slope, but some collective awareness might indeed be conducive to enlightenment. Takeaway 2. The hype cycle could theoretically be applied to phenomena other than technology. Non-technologies that I would say are at the peak of inflated expectations and therefore about to fall: yoga, meditation, psychedelic healing, which some would argue are psychotechnologies. Non-technologies that are in the trough of disillusionment, what used to be called the sharing economy, remember that, and then became the gig economy, but could now really be called the insecure economy. Maybe Burning Man, maybe the hype cycle itself, although at this point it's probably moved onto the slope or the plateau. Here's a funky one. What about scientific materialism? What if scientific materialism, the idea that the universe is only knowable through the scientific method, has been on the hype cycle and is only now hitting the slope of enlightenment? I'll get into that in an upcoming episode on misinformation, fake news, and how in the world we know what we know about the world. Anyway, I think the hype cycle can be applied to all kinds of phenomena and ultimately help us understand how we change over time when our expectations run ahead of reality. Coming back to tech and coming back full circle, perhaps since The Economist coined the term techlash in early 2018, Facebook and Twitter and social media in general have been in the trough of disillusionment. However, this pandemic-induced backlash to the techlash may have them ascending the slope of enlightenment a bit sooner than planned. Which is not to say that we're no longer aware of the harms that sent social media into the trough in the first place, but that we're also aware of the benefits that sent them to the peak, and that we can perhaps now integrate both in order to ascend the slope. All right, folks. That was the Gartner Hype Cycle as presented by the Infinite Lunchbox. May it help you navigate the backlash to the techlash in these times of uncertainty. And if it does, please like and subscribe on YouTube, give 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, share on social media, and be in touch in the YouTube comments and on Twitter at StephLep. Thank you.